What this man admitted to on a Ring doorbell is like something out of a horror film. Eric Contreras was a student at Florida International University. On November the 6th, he headed back to his family home to celebrate his birthday. When he returned to Miami, he had no idea he wouldn't get out alive. Ring doorbell footage captured a horrific confession from his dad when his mum spoke to him through the app. Eric's dad David went up to the camera after his wife repeatedly shouted hello. In the recording, she could be heard asking him what's going on. David was videoed holding his head in distress. His wife asks, "Is he alive?" referring to Eric. And David states, "No, he's not breathing, he's dead." His wife asks, "But why, David?" David then starts explaining that the fighting on the way home had become unbearable. He states his son had been fighting with girls and asking if girls could sleep over, to which he told him no. David then states, "It's not your fault, please call my brother." The 52-year-old then fell to the ground. The wife can be heard on the recording stating he'll go to jail. David then rang the police and they arrived to the scene to find Eric deceased with multiple gunshot wounds. David was arrested and is pleading not guilty to second-degree murder.
This has to be one of the creepiest mugshots I've ever seen, and the story behind it is pretty disturbing. This is the man in the mugshot, Christopher Queen. At the time of his arrest, he was 48 years old and living in Pennsylvania. So on Election Day in 2018, Christopher entered a polling center in Pennsylvania planning on casting a vote. But when he arrived to vote, he was told that he couldn't because he wasn't registered. Poll workers who were working that day even stated that they heard Christopher mention that he was getting paid $100 to come vote, which obviously was not true. But when Christopher arrived, like I said before, he wasn't registered to vote in Washington County, the county he was in. When the workers told him that he couldn't vote, they noticed that Christopher began to shake uncontrollably and became filled with some sort of a rage. He then made the verbal threat that he was going to come back and shoot up the place, and after that, he was quickly put into handcuffs. I don't know the full story behind why he chose to exhibit this expression in his mugshot, but they caught him before he could enact any sort of violence, and yeah, he was arrested. It's worth noting as well that in other news reports that surfaced after this threat was made, Christopher is seen smiling in the same type of manner. Luckily though, authorities were able to arrest Christopher and put him in custody that day before he could cause any violence.
Imagine being on death row and having your execution botched 10 times. The saying goes that cats have 9 lives, but Thomas Creech may have more. Thomas Creech was supposed to be executed this year. He ate his last meal of fried chicken and ice cream and said his goodbyes. However, things did not go to plan and he's actually still alive. Thomas is a convicted killer from Ohio. He was convicted of 2 murders in the 70s and was sentenced to death. He did, however, appeal this and got his sentence reduced to life in prison. He then killed someone while he was in prison. This was David Jensen, a disabled man who was in prison for theft. Thomas beat him to death with a battery-filled sock. Thomas was once again sentenced to death. Over the years, he's confessed to a total of 42 killings, but not all of these have been verified. Needless to say, he's obviously a very dangerous man, and at the end of February this year, he was due to be executed. Now, an hour after he was brought into the so-called death chamber, the execution was called off. In a statement, it was revealed that between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. on the 28th of February, staff tried 10 times to access Thomas's veins and failed. They tried veins on his arms and his legs and were unsuccessful. After eventually getting professional medical advice, they decided to halt the execution, and he is still alive.
The death of Bob Saget was completely unexpected and pretty mysterious, so let's talk about it. So if you don't know Bob Saget, then you probably haven't ever watched the show Full House. Full House was the show that really launched Bob Saget's career, along with the careers of people like John Stamos. And Bob Saget also went on to host America's Funniest Home Videos. He was a very beloved figure in Hollywood and in American culture, but one day in 2022, the completely unexpected happened. At around 4 p.m. on January 9th, 2022, Bob Saget was found dead in his hotel room. These are real pictures released by the police of Bob Saget's hotel room after they found his body. At the time of his death, Bob Saget was in Orange County, Florida. He was on a tour doing stand-up comedy and had just played a show the night before. On February 9th, the autopsy report was released, which stated that Bob Saget had died from blunt force trauma to the back of the head. Now, usually you hear of blunt force trauma causing a death in the case of murder cases. But according to authorities and the official story, Bob Saget supposedly fell somewhere in this hotel room, hit his head on the back of the head, crawled into bed, and died in his sleep. Now, I don't really know what to think of all of this. I think it probably was some sort of a tragic incident. But regardless, this was an extremely shocking death, and once again, it is somewhat mysterious. In September of 2011, two young men broke into Craig Stockard's home in California. On that day, the robbers were looking for anything valuable in Kevin's house. This all took place in Delhi, California, a town pretty close to Sacramento. These young men searched all of Craig's property, and they eventually ended up in his barn, where they found a number of what they believed were blank CDs. After the two young robbers fled the home, Craig called the police himself and reported the robbery. But when the boys returned to their home and began looking at the CDs, they discovered something absolutely disturbing. On those CDs, they discovered CP or CSAM, aka lewd images of minors and, yes, children. Apparently, Craig had stockpiled hundreds of these videos and photos, and this led the robbers to rat on themselves and call the police. Eventually, Craig's home was raided, and yes, he was arrested and imprisoned for possession of CP or CSAM. According to authorities, he had been downloading these images and videos for over 7 years. And it turned out that over 30 of those 50 CDs that the boys stole from Craig's home contained CP or CSAM. And I can't find any clear resolution on this story, but according to what I'm reading online, the two burglars who reported Craig never were arrested themselves. So in committing a crime of their own, they busted someone for committing an even worse crime. Kind of strange how that worked out, isn't it?
These are the most disturbing deaths caught on audio, and this is a massive trigger warning. What you're about to see and hear is a simulation of what happened to Alaskan Flight 261, following a catastrophic loss in pitch control, killing all 88 people on board. This is real audio footage from the plane going down between air traffic controllers and the pilots. The plane went completely inverted, meaning it was flying upside down, and just listen to how calm the pilots are. This is absolutely disturbing, and can you imagine being a passenger on this flight while the plane is completely inverted?
Alaska 261, we are in a dive here. Alaska 261, taking through. We're at 26,000 feet. We are in a vertical dive. Not a dive yet, but we've lost vertical control of our airplane. Alaska 261. We're at 23.7. Request, we got it back under control there. No, Alaska 261, take condition. 261, we're at 24,000 feet. Kind of stabilized. Blowing here, and we're going to put a little troubleshooting. Can you give me a block between 20 and 25? Alaska 261, maintain block altitude, flight level 200, flight level 250. Alaska 261, we'll take that block. We'll be monitoring for you. Alaska 261, you over here with me? Yes, sir. Plane inverted, sir. And he's just hit the water.
Missing Florida woman was just found locked inside of a shipping container nearly 72 hours after she disappeared, and what she has to say about it is bizarre.
So what happened?
I don't know, I was in one place and I found in another.
So this is 52-year-old Marlene Lopez, and she was last seen at her home on Lucerne Drive in Cocoa, Florida this past Monday. She wasn't officially reported missing until Wednesday though, and that's because one of her coworkers became concerned after Marlene failed to pick up her son. The Cocoa Police Department began to search every location that Marlene was known to frequent, but they came up empty-handed. That is until yesterday when someone heard banging and screaming coming from a shipping container next to a business on 2005 North Cocoa Boulevard. When the person managed to get into the container, they found Marlene. She was uninjured but dehydrated, which I 100% believe considering Florida is so humid and hot. According to police, Marlene wasn't in a good state of mind when she was found, but she said that she was in one place and found in another. The man who owns the shipping container, his name is Troy, and he says that the container is stocked with lawnmowers. He said that he first saw Marlene walking around the area Monday evening, and as part of his routine, he ended up locking the shipping container on Tuesday. Troy said that he didn't hear anything inside that night or on Wednesday, and he believes that Marlene walked inside of the container on her own and passed out. He reportedly found a lighter and a pipe inside after she was rescued. One thing that he does want to make clear is that he is not to blame for Marlene getting trapped, and he says that he's even considering pressing charges against her. According to the Cocoa Police, it appears that Troy just locked the shipping container up for the night, not realizing that anyone was inside of it, but they are still investigating the circumstances surrounding the incident.
mum murdered one of her children to collect donation money. In January 2020, a little boy was rushed to hospital in Thailand. The boy was the 4-year-old son of Natiwon Rakunjet. He was suffering with a bad stomach and he was also vomiting blood. Now, doctors were obviously seriously concerned about this child, and the mother told them that he had a seafood allergy. Now, this whole turn of events was really concerning because Natiwon's daughter had already died the year prior. The little girl had a very similar stomachache and had begun to get more and more unwell. She started vomiting blood and ended up dying from internal hemorrhaging. It was obviously very strange that the woman's son was now experiencing seemingly the same fate. Doctors found that the reaction was actually not a seafood allergy at all. He in fact had a very serious stomach infection. Now, horrifically, the medics found that the child's mouth and internal organs contained traces of corrosive chemicals that are usually found in bathroom cleaners. This was obviously extremely concerning for hospital staff, and they knew that they needed to act fast. Natiwon was arrested in May 2020. She was charged with human trafficking for using her children for financial gain. She was also arrested for the murder of her daughter and attempted murder of her son. Luckily, her son survived the ordeal, but it's believed that she'd actually been poisoning him since he was 2 years old. Prior to her daughter's death, she had fed her meals laced with corrosive substances. The courts discovered that she committed the crimes purely for financial gain. She would post images like this online in order to get sympathy and therefore donations. She's now been sentenced to death and her son has been removed from her care.
This 11-year-old boy died after doing a new dangerous TikTok trend. This is Tommy Lee Billington, and he recently died after doing a very dangerous TikTok trend. Tommy Lee, who was 11 years old, was found unresponsive at a friend's house on Saturday after taking part in a dangerous trend called chroming, which is when someone inhales toxic chemicals such as paint, solvent, aerosol cans, and cleaning products. Tommy Lee was then rushed to the hospital about midday before being pronounced dead shortly after. Tommy Lee's heartbroken grandmother, Tina Burns, said he was killed attempting the TikTok challenge that had already killed 2 teenage girls. She said, and I quote, "He died instantly after a sleepover at a friend's house. The boys had tried the TikTok craze." Tommy Lee went into cardiac arrest immediately and died right then and there. The hospital did everything to try and bring him back, but nothing worked. He was sadly gone. Tommy Lee's mother is now begging other parents not to let their kids use the social media app TikTok, saying, "This costed my son his life from trying something other kids are doing." But then again, it's not hard for an 11-year-old to understand that inhaling toxic chemicals isn't good. Now, you can blame TikTok for this, but you can also blame the people that were around him, probably peer pressuring him, or he could have been the one that wanted to do it. All in all, it's extremely unfortunate what happened to Tommy Lee, and I urge every single one of you to not do this new challenge called chroming, because as you can see, it can be fatal.
Just want to give a heavy, and I'm gonna show you a video first. Oh, I've seen this before.
Welcome campers and campers to the Daily Capper, currently on Blog TV Junior. A girl named Peyton is being blackmailed every day by her mob code D1206. Peyton acceptably gives in to his every request rather than blocking his number or reporting him to the police.
If it seems familiar to a lot of you guys, because they used the format of an HBO series back in the day called Crashbox, which had a similar segment. The whole show was specifically made for kids.
Welcome to Distraction News, where we give you the news, and at the end of our newscast, I'll ask you 5...
But the only difference was this whole thing was basically a CP ring for, and they were called cappers. It was all public, because literally the first episode of the Daily Capper, the way the host was talking, it was talking to people who already knew about certain things.
Yeah, I realized that it was saying codes and shit.
Why they were called cappers was because these, they would go into live streams, because back in the day the chat rooms weren't regulated, so they would go into the live streams and they would bombard these underage kids with a bunch of compliments and eventually have them flash the camera, and they would take a screen cap and then use those photos and it means to get more pictures sent to them,
The blackmail.
or if not, they would just send it to their friends, their family members, their schools.
The true story behind this mugshot is incredibly disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. This is 23-year-old Roberto Silva Jr. In 2020, he shot and killed 2 employees at a Sonic in Nebraska, wounded 2 others, and set fire to the building. So the week before Roberto went on this murder spree at the Sonic, he had actually been arrested at the same Sonic for identity theft. This is the Sonic where all this happened in Bellevue, Nebraska. And just a few days before the shooting, Roberto was arrested after he used an app that belonged to someone else to purchase $57 worth of food at this Sonic. When the person whose account Roberto used reported this to the police, he was arrested, and obviously this enraged Roberto. And just a few days later, Roberto showed up to that Sonic with a U-Haul. On November 21st, 2020, Roberto showed up to the Sonic in a U-Haul. He threw an incendiary device inside of the Sonic, trying to light the place on fire. He then tried to light the U-Haul on fire. People thought that there might have been a bomb in the back of it, and he opened fire on the employees with his handgun. Sadly, 2 of the employees that were working that night would go on to pass from their gunshot injuries. 22-year-old Nathan Pastrana and 28-year-old Ryan Helbert. And thankfully, the other 2 people that were shot that night made full recoveries. After his arrest, though, when Roberto was brought into the police station, he smiled in his mugshots. And it looks like he doesn't even have an ounce of remorse in him for his terrible actions. Quickly, the media dubbed him the Smiling Shooter or the Sonic Shooter. And in 2022, Roberto pled guilty to all 15 charges and is now serving a life sentence in prison. Roberto even sent a letter admitting to the crime, stating that he intended on killing the people that were witnesses to his identity theft crime. He basically wanted to make sure that nobody could rat on him. And I think knowing the story behind this mugshot makes it one of the creepiest that I've ever seen.
This is by far one of the worst work accidents ever, and whatever you do, never look up the video. The video that I'm about to explain to you has left many people traumatized, so whatever you do, don't go looking for it. The video is pretty short, coming in at 52 seconds in length, and it's not known where in Russia this took place. And it's a mystery to how this footage made its way onto the internet. As you play the video, you see a man walk towards the lathe machine, which he assumes is off. The man is wearing baggy clothes and some kind of jacket, and wearing loose clothing around a lathe machine is a no-no, since it can be sucked up into the machine, as this man found out. After the man approaches the machine, he seems to reach over it, but the rotating pole seems to get stuck on one of his sleeves, and it then drags the man into the machine. Initially, it doesn't kill the man. Instead, it traps his arm around the rotating pole, and the machine appears to have stopped. But after a couple seconds, the machine seems to start again, and this time dragging the poor man's entire body into the machine, rotating it around and around and around. As his limbs hit the ground after each rotation, you see red mist appear, and after a few more seconds, chunks of flesh and body parts start to fly off the machine. A man then walks into the shot, and he sees what's happening to his coworker. And with a look of shock, he quickly turns off the machine, but it was too late. His coworker's body has been completely torn apart into multiple pieces, and the machine is a bloody mess. There are a collection of still images from the aftermath of the incident which shows how unrecognizable the man's body is. In one photo, you see what appears to be a tibia with no flesh around it lying on the ground. And in another photo, you see the victim's severed and crushed head underneath the machine. It's absolutely disturbing and awful to look at. This video is hard to explain and hard to watch. It's extremely gruesome and disturbing, and I really don't recommend looking for it.
Who else worked for Jeffrey Epstein? That's a question that I've always had, and it's obviously impossible to run such a high-profile sex trafficking ring by yourself with just another woman. Well, let's start with these 2 men who are currently being sued for their involvement in the sex trafficking ring. This is Darren Indyke, Jeffrey Epstein's personal attorney, and this is Richard Kahn, Jeffrey Epstein's in-house accountant and executor of his estate. So a recent lawsuit by a number of victims is claiming that these 2 helped facilitate this entire sex trafficking operation. Obviously, there had to be a lot of different moving parts to this operation, and the people in this suit are claiming that Richard and Darren paid hush money, threatened people and their families, and tried as hard as they could to keep everybody involved silent. The plaintiffs in the lawsuit are also claiming that Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer and accountant gave him access to an abundance of cash to help him run his sex ring. In the lawsuit, these victims also claim that Jeffrey Epstein had a room inside of his $77 million Manhattan mansion that doubled as a surveillance room. Apparently, this room inside of the mansion was manned by somebody 24/7, and this person's job was to record and capture everything that was going on there. This, I can assume, was Jeffrey Epstein's attempt to capture video and audio incriminating people he was involved with in criminal, disturbing, disgusting activity. And that once again makes me ask the question, what happened to the tapes? What happened to all these recordings? What happened to all of that stuff? And all of the different people that worked for Epstein, like let's say we're talking about right now, this person who was hired to watch these security cameras 24/7. It's known that some of these disgusting trafficking acts and assaults occurred at Epstein's mansion. Who's the person who was running those cameras and watching those tapes? Where are they now? Why haven't they come forward? Why isn't the government going after them? It's just another disturbing and frankly disgusting facet of this already just mind-blowingly dark web of lies and deceit.
These are the most disturbing cartel execution videos on the internet, part 1. This video is called Ghost Rider, and it's one of the most infamous cartel execution videos, and I really don't recommend looking or searching for it because it's 100% one of the worst. The video was recorded in September 2020, and the victim's name is Ghost Rider, and he was apparently tortured over 3 days. And he was subjected to some of the worst acts of violence you will ever see. The video is about 2 minutes long, and it begins with Ghost Rider already in a horrible state. It appears his face has already been flayed, which means skinned, and what the killers do next is absolutely horrible. They get rubbing alcohol and pour it on his face, and keep in mind, his face has already been skinned, so just imagine the stinging pain. We all put rubbing alcohol on cuts, and we all know how bad it hurts. So just imagine having your face skinned and then somebody pours rubbing alcohol all over it. After this, the killers then set Ghost Rider's face on fire, and his face is then completely covered in flames and is absolutely melting away right before your eyes. You hear the cartel members laughing and mocking him as he burns and his face melts. Ghost Rider is letting out blood-curdling screams as the flames continue. The video then skips to later on in the day or a couple days later, and Ghost Rider has been tortured and burned so severely that his whole head is basically a red skull. There's no skin, there's no hair, there's no facial features, you can't even see his eyes. And after all of this, he is still alive. At the end of the video, they tell him to raise his head, which he does, which confirms he was still alive, and I have no idea how somebody can live through all of this torture. They then set his head on fire again to make him look like Ghost Rider with his burning skull. And seeing his exposed red skull burning is a very disturbing sight. Apparently the guy was nicknamed Ghost Rider because he would do the same thing to people that he caught, which was the main reason they killed him in this exact way. This video is just horrible and extremely gruesome, and it's a video you should definitely stay curious on because in my opinion, it's that bad.
This 21-month-old baby went missing 51 years ago and has just been reunited with her family. In 1971, Melissa Highsmith was a baby. Her parents had just separated and her mum, Alta, was looking for someone to help with childcare so she could try and keep her job. She posted an advert in a local newspaper and got a reply from someone called Ruth Johnson. Ruth picked Melissa up from Atla's roommate one day when Atla was at work. The roommate reported that Ruth seemed to be nice and she was well dressed. She was wearing a bonnet and white gloves. However, tragically the woman never returned, and this was the last time her mum would see Melissa for 51 years. The local community set out looking for baby Melissa, but the police had little to go off. Atla had been absolutely desperate for childcare, and with the threat of losing her job, hadn't been able to visit Ruth at her address prior to agreeing to the childcare. Ruth and Atla had arranged to meet prior to the initial babysit, but Ruth failed to show up. With limited options, once Ruth got back in contact, Atla took her up on her offer. Melissa's case would go cold for half a century. In November 2022, there was a false sighting of Melissa. Despite the disappointment that this caused the family, it also spurred them on to start looking again. Melissa's dad submitted a home DNA test kit. The results that came back were shocking. The test was able to link Melissa's parents to grandchildren they didn't even know about. Melissa's dad was able to get hold of a marriage record and find Melissa on Facebook. Melissa was going by the name Melanie Walden. At first, Melanie was very skeptical when Jeffrey explained the situation. He managed to convince her that he was genuine by explaining to her the birthmark that he knew that she had on her back. Melanie agreed to a DNA test which once and for all confirmed she was missing baby Melissa. She finally got reunited with her family and revealed she'd actually been raised in a town less than 20 minutes from where she was snatched. Now, no information has been released about the woman who raised Melissa, apart from the fact that she was abusive and caused Melissa to leave home when she was just 15. When Melissa confronted her about the news that she now knew, the woman that raised her admitted to knowing that she had been kidnapped. Melissa is now going by her birth name again and wants to have another wedding ceremony so that her dad can walk her down the aisle.
This is by far one of the scariest games to play in real life, so whatever you do, never play this game. The game is called Baby Blue, and to play the game, you have to go into a bathroom on your own, turn off the lights and then lock the door. Then you stare into the mirror and hold your arms out like you're rocking a baby, and repeat the words Baby Blue, 13 times without making a mistake. If you do this right, you will suddenly feel the weight of an invisible baby in your arms. The baby will get heavier and heavier as it grows larger and larger. You will also feel it scratching your arms pretty deep. Before it gets too heavy, you have to quickly take the invisible baby, flush it down the toilet, and run out of the bathroom. If you don't do it fast enough, a hideous woman will appear in the mirror. She will then yell, "Give me back my baby," and scream so loud that it will break the glass. And if you are still holding the baby, she will kill you. Some people believe the woman is Bloody Mary and she murdered her own child when she shattered a mirror and used a piece of broken glass to stab it to death. According to an urban legend, a group of girls found out about the game Baby Blue and decided to try it out. They didn't believe it would work, so they sent their friend Laura into the bathroom on her own. She turned the lights off and closed the door behind her. Laura then put out her hands and began saying the phrase Baby Blue, Baby Blue. All of a sudden, a baby appeared in her arms and began scratching her. Laura was scared out of her mind and had no idea what to do. She wanted to drop it and run, but she was afraid of what might happen. She just stood there holding the invisible baby as it grew heavier and heavier. And suddenly she saw something in the bathroom mirror that terrified her. When Laura's friends heard her screaming, they tried to open the bathroom door, but it was locked. When they finally opened the door, they found Laura lying on the ground dead. Her eyes had been scratched out, and they couldn't move her because something large and invisible was pinning her to the ground. Now, I don't know how true this is, it is just an urban legend story, but still, it's absolutely terrifying because it's associated with the game Baby Blue. I don't think I'll ever play this game because it sounds extremely terrifying even if it is fake, but nonetheless, if you ever decide to play this game, let me know how it goes.
Last week, a girl who was walking to school found a severed arm near a park, and over the course of a week, multiple other body parts have been found strewn across Babylon, New York. This case is honestly terrifying. So on February 29th, a girl found a severed left arm near a park in Babylon and called the police. When the Suffolk County Police Department arrived, they, along with cadaver dogs, then found a human leg in a pile of leaves nearby. After thoroughly searching the scene, they then found a right arm, a severed head, and many more body parts in the park. Authorities were able to confirm that the remains belong to a 53-year-old man and a 59-year-old woman, but their identities have not yet been released to the public. A week after this grisly discovery, more human remains were found in Bethpage State Park in Farmingdale, just a few miles away, and it was confirmed that the remains belong to the same victims. So far, human remains have been found in 3 different locations in Suffolk County, leaving behind a chilling mystery. Since the discovery, these 4 people have been arrested in connection to the crime. They are Stephen Brown, Jeffrey Mackey, Amanda Wallace, and Alexis Neves, and they all reportedly lived together at a home in Amityville. They have since been charged with hindering prosecution, tampering with physical evidence, and concealment of a human corpse. But here's the thing. They've all since been given supervised release, meaning they're all walking free in the public right now. Their release is based solely on the fact that at the moment, they have not been charged with the killing of the 2 victims. So according to authorities, they're free to go until their next court appearance, or if new evidence is found where authorities are able to press additional charges. All 4 suspects are required to wear GPS monitoring bracelets and are ordered to stay in Suffolk County. The only thing is that they aren't allowed to return to their Amityville apartment due to inoperable plumbing, which was reportedly removed during the police investigation. It's insane to me that they've all been released because authorities searched their house and what they found is horrifying. Police found cutting tools, a meat cleaver, and traces of human remains, but according to police, that isn't enough evidence to prove who killed and dismembered the 2 victims and why. So far, a motive has not been released, but authorities are investigating the case as a possible love triangle. One of the suspects allegedly dismembered his girlfriend and a man that he believes she cheated with, but this has not been officially confirmed. It's just been reported by a source who claims seems to be familiar with the matter. As for the two victims, not a lot of information has been released about them, although police do believe that they may have lived together in Yonkers. But at this moment, their relationship to the suspects remains a mystery.
These are the worst deaths imaginable, and this one is truly horrifying. On April 10th, 2018, 16-year-old Kyle Plush was in the parking lot of Seven Hills School and drove there in the family's minivan. And he was just there to practice tennis and nothing more. But he went to the third row of the minivan and reached over to grab his tennis equipment. But as he was reaching down, his knee hit the bottom of the seat and something unexpected and truly horrifying happened. So the seat literally flipped and it turned Kyle upside down. So now the upper half of his body was trapped with the seat pressing up against his chest. And at 3:14 p.m. that afternoon, Kyle was able to call 911. And immediately when the 911 operator answered, Kyle immediately started screaming, "Help, help, I'm stuck in my van." The dispatcher kept trying to figure out where Kyle was located and he just kept saying Seven Hills, but the dispatcher couldn't pick up what he was saying after Seven Hills. And in the 911 call, you can actually hear Kyle banging against the window and screaming that he desperately needs help. The call went on for 3 minutes but then got disconnected, and the dispatcher then tried to call Kyle back. But it went straight to voicemail, and at 3:21 p.m. that day, officers were sent to that location Kyle said. They arrived at 3:26 p.m. and searched everything but couldn't find Kyle. And they then closed out the request and just went about their days, as Kyle was still stuck in this awful position. Then at 3:35 p.m., Kyle calls 911 again, saying the same things like, "I'm stuck in my van, please help, this isn't a joke." He then said, "I don't think I have that much time left. Please tell my mom I love her." And the sad part is, officers were still there when he made this call. But for some reason, this information was not given to the officers. Just to give you a visual, the star was where Kyle Plush was parked. And I don't know exactly where the officers were searching in this area, but they obviously didn't find him. And 6 hours after his first 911 call, his father went to the school and found him. Kyle was dead and he died a slow and painful death from asphyxia due to chest compressions. It's just honestly insane that nobody saw him, especially because his feet were visible. The job the dispatcher and the police did was just awful. I don't know how they couldn't find him, and it's actually rage-inducing. The 911 operator was also investigated but was not fired. This case is absolutely horrifying, and may Kyle Plush rest in peace.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This is the harrowing case of the Hello Kitty murder. Now this case is extremely dark and you will need a strong stomach to get through this. Fan Man Yi was abandoned by her family as a child. She was raised in an orphanage but was kicked out at age 15 due to age restrictions. Becoming homeless, she fell into problems with substance abuse and began having to work as an S-worker to make money. She would go on to marry one of her clients who also had substance abuse issues in 1996. She had a baby boy 2 years later, just shortly before her brutal murder. Her husband was described as abusive and neighbours claimed that they would hear them fighting through the walls and hear their child screaming and crying. Now Fan wanted to turn her life around. She quit substances and S-work and got a job as a waitress and left her abusive husband. However, she was struggling financially because of this. Chan Man Lok was a powerful substance dealer who had previously been one of Fan's regular clients. In early 1999, Fan was desperate for money, so she stole his wallet. When he found out that she had stolen his wallet, he demanded she gave the money back, plus interest. She did immediately give the money back, but couldn't afford to give him any extra. This is when Chan enlisted 2 of his henchmen to kidnap her. He intended to force her into S-work to get his own back on Fan and also to make money off her. What they did to her while she was imprisoned for a month is actually mostly too horrific for this app. She was tied up, tortured, and made to eat human feces. What is also really horrific in this case is the fact that a child was involved in her murder. A 14-year-old girl whose identity has been kept anonymous for obvious reasons reported the crime to police. Now, she had been made to be involved with this. She had been groomed by Chan and was known as his girlfriend, which is disgusting and ridiculous considering she was only a child. When the child was at the apartment, she witnessed Chan kick Fan in the head 50 times. The child also joined in, hitting her in the head. After a month of torture, Fan died overnight. After discovering she was dead, Chan's henchmen dismembered her with a saw. They cooked her to stop her from decomposing and creating an unpleasant smell. They sewed her boiled skull in an oversized Hello Kitty doll. When police entered the apartment, they faced a horrifying scene. Body part trophies of Fan were found inside, with evidence that all three men had interacted with them. Due to the state of Fan's body, there was no way to determine a cause of death. Shockingly, the three were only convicted of manslaughter. They were sentenced to a life in prison with the possibility of parole.
This had to be a horrific way to die. It was just an ordinary day in London, February of 1983, and a plumber named Michael gets a call to go out to a location called Cranley Gardens. The tenants were complaining of a horrible smell, the toilets weren't flushing, the pipes were backed up, so Michael shows up and he removes one of the covers to the drains by the side of one of the houses, and he looks down into it and sees a pile of what looks like a slimy, flesh-like substance with little pieces of bone sticking out of it, and he immediately goes, "This ain't right." So he calls a supervisor. Supervisor shows up and takes a look, and they say, yeah, let's call the police right now. And while they were waiting for the police to arrive, Michael looked at one of the tenants and said, "That flesh almost looks human." And one of the tenants actually replied back to Michael and said, "No, it looks like somebody's been flushing their Kentucky Fried Chicken." However, it was not Kentucky Fried Chicken. Police arrived on the scene and confirmed that the flesh was in fact human. They do a little investigating and realize that the flesh had been being flushed from the top floor. So they go up to the top floor and they knock on the door of a tenant named Dennis Nilsson. Dennis opens the door and the police confront him on the matter, and at first he acts completely shocked. But after a little pushing and prodding from the police, Dennis sighs and he goes, "It's a long story and it goes back a long time, but I'll tell you everything. I need to get it off my chest anyway." As the police drove to the station with Dennis Nilsson in handcuffs in the back seat, the officers said, "So, what are we talking about here? 1 or 2 bodies down there? How many people did you flush?" And Dennis just coolly goes, 15 or 16. As it would turn out, Michael the plumber unknowingly led police to a serial killer who makes the Jeffrey Dahmer story look like a nursery rhyme. And just as Dennis had mentioned earlier, he did have a lot to get off of his chest. He explained that he started out trying to have normal relationships and he didn't want to kill people, it just kind of panned out that way. He would have a relationship here, a relationship there, but they would ultimately always end up leaving him, and so he finally found a way to get them to stay. In the 1970s, Dennis had started frequenting gay bars and pubs and luring men back to his apartment with the promise of drinks, and once he got them in there and got them inebriated, he would then proceed to strangle them or drown them. And then once his house guest was dead, he would perform a ritual of cleaning, bathing, shaving, and dressing the bodies, and then posing them in different places around the house, taking photographs, having conversations with the corpses, doing some naughtier things with the corpses, and then ultimately he would stuff the bodies under the floorboards. And he would leave the bodies under the floorboards as long as he possibly could, but ultimately, of course, decomposition would take over, the smell would get to be too much, so he would dismember the bodies, drag it outside, put it in a bonfire, and then mask the smell of burning flesh by putting a car tire on the bonfire. But then Dennis's landlord started remodeling the apartment and actually evicted Dennis, and so Dennis was forced to move into an attic flat where there was no longer access to a piece of land where he could do bonfires. And so he had to start getting creative and find other ways to get rid of the bodies of the people he was killing, and so he began dismembering the bodies into smaller pieces and flushing them down the toilet, which is where our man Michael the plumber ultimately unearthed everything that he had been doing. In a short span of 5 years, Dennis has been confirmed to have killed 12, although he claims to have killed more, and he was guilty of at least 7 more attempted murders. He died in prison in 2018.
This nerd is one of the worst pedophiles in world history. This story is extremely disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. So this freak's name is Matthew Falder. Matthew was born in Cambridge, England, and he came from a very well-respected, wealthy family. Matthew even graduated from the University of Cambridge. You heard that correctly. So to everybody in the outside world, Matthew seemed like a normal kind of geeky computer guy. This is a post from his actual Twitter. By the way, his Twitter is still up. But behind the scenes and in the shadows, Matthew was doing some of the most disturbing things on the internet I've ever read about. So Matthew's known offenses start in 2007 when he starts secretly recording his housemates in the house that they share. He informed the girl he lived with that he had been secretly recording her while she was naked, and she just laughed it off thinking he was kidding. But around 2009, Matthew started engaging in hurtcore. So on the dark web, Matthew Falder went by a number of different names. These names included Evil Mind, 666 The Devil, and In the Garden. Online, Matthew would pose as a young woman named Liz. He would then obtain compromising images of people, get them to send photos of them naked, and would begin to blackmail them. Now, this was not normal blackmail. In one case, Matthew blackmailed a man into assaulting a 4-year-old child on camera. So this is a short list of the things that Matthew forced people to do. I'm going to read it to you. Rape, murder, sadism, torture, pedophilia, blackmail, humiliation, and degradation. One of Matthew's 50 victims was only 14 years old. And in a chat online, he said he would, quote, mentally fuck her up. He also stated he didn't care if the 14-year-old girl lived or died. 4 of Matthew's victims attempted to take their own lives because the blackmailing was so intense. And when one of the victims pleaded with Matthew saying that they're going to take their own life, Matthew said, do it, he's going to release the videos and photos he has of them anyways. Matthew would blackmail people into eating their own feces, licking their dirty toilet seats, and even eating tampons and dog food. And keep in mind, he made all these people record this and send him videos and photos so that he wouldn't release the other material he had on them. Now, British police have actually said that this is one of the most depraved offenders they have ever encountered. And definitely one of the worst pedophiles, if not the worst pedophile in British history, based on his horrific string of crimes. Now, eventually, through a massive sting, Matthew was eventually captured. Now, Matthew was caught and sentenced in 2017, but sadly, he was only sentenced to 32 years in prison. And recently, his actual sentence has been reduced to 25 years. Since this freak was convicted in 2017, that means that it'll be less than 20 years before Matthew is back out on the streets in England. This guy will be back on the streets again. Now, in a recent TikTok, I just covered the story of a man here in America who got an 11-year-old girl pregnant, and he was given a 40-year sentence. Now, that's a very harsh sentence compared to other sentences here. I think that's a good thing. It's not long enough, in my opinion. But then when you think about this guy with his almost 50 victims getting only about 25 years in prison, it infuriates a person. It gets me worked up. This is the definition of a hardcore, disturbed pedophile. A man who has hurt many, many children, many adults, ruined many, many lives. And it's shocking that he's even going to be given the chance to walk the streets as a free man one day again.
This might be the most disturbing story I have ever told on TikTok. I mean, I literally cannot get my head around what I just read. Carl Tanzler was a radiologist working in a Key West hospital in the 1930s. And the day that this horrific story was set in motion was the day that a woman named Elena de Hoyos came in for examinations in Carl Tanzler's hospital. Elena de Hoyos was a beautiful woman. She was actually known in the Key West area to be somewhat of a beauty queen. She had dark brown hair, dark deep eyes, and beautiful brown skin. And Carl Tanzler was immediately just taken with her. I mean, mesmerized with how beautiful this woman was. But over the course of her examinations in the hospital, it was discovered that Elena had tuberculosis. And upon that diagnosis, Carl, in his self-professed medical expertise, took it upon himself to begin treating Elena, and he started using experimental treatments, electroshock therapy, anything that he could possibly do to try and save Elena's life because he had become somewhat obsessed. But sadly, in the 1930s especially, most tuberculosis cases were fatal, and this was the case for Elena de Hoyos, and she did pass away. All through her battle with tuberculosis, Carl Tanzler had been showering Elena with gifts, with jewelry, doing everything he could to profess his love to her, although it was never really proven that Elena reciprocated that love. And when she passed away, he paid for the funeral, and with the family's permission, he even had her put in an above-ground crypt, which he proceeded to visit every night. But soon it got to the point where visiting Elena's crypt every night wasn't enough for Carl, and so one night he slipped into the Key West cemetery, went to Elena's crypt, removed her body from the tomb, loaded it into a little toy wagon, proceeded to then cart the body through the Key West cemetery and back to his house. And according to Carl, this was all Elena's spirit's idea, because he's reported to have said that whenever he would go and visit the grave, he would sit by the graveside and serenade Elena's corpse with one of her favorite Spanish songs, and at that point her spirit would come and visit him and tell him to take her corpse home with him. And so he did. And what he did with her corpse is where it just gets... Carl took Elena's bones and pieced them back together, securing them with piano wire. And as the skin started to decompose off Elena's body, he began replacing the skin with silk cloth dipped in wax. And as the body continued to further decompose and the hair started falling out of Elena's scalp, Carl actually fashioned a wig out of hair that he had previously obtained from Elena's mother and put it on the corpse. And in the later stages of a body's decomposition, the chest and abdominal cavity began to sink inward, and Carl began stuffing her chest and abdominal cavity with rags, trying to maintain her shape. Carl would fully dress Elena's body, complete with stockings, gloves, jewelry, dresses, and he began, of course, saturating her body in perfume, disinfectants, anything he could to mask the smell of the decomposition and the rotting flesh, and he kept Elena's body in his bed with him, and he did this for 9 years. Apparently, at one point, Carl was even spotted through an open window in his home, dancing with Elena's corpse. And eventually, Elena's sister began hearing rumors that Carl was keeping her sister's body in his house, and so she reported it to the authorities. The authorities raided his home and indeed found Elena's body. Carl Tanzler was arrested, and he was found competent to stand trial, but eventually, all the charges were dropped and he was turned loose because the crime statute of limitations had expired. Elena's body was ultimately taken to a new grave in the Key West Cemetery. It's an unmarked grave so that nobody else can ever tamper with her remains again, and she can at last rest in peace. Y'all, I'm a recording artist trying to get a record deal. I tell these stories as a hobby. Please hit follow, leave me a comment if you're one of my true fans, hit like, and go check out my music. Bye!
Sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminating in acts of cannibalism.
This is the tragic story of 5-year-old Logan Mwangi. Logan was born on the 15th of March 2016 at the Princess of Wales Hospital in Bridgend, to parents Angarad Williamson and Benjamin Mwangi. Logan's mother had a criminal record dating back to before Logan was born. Soon after Logan's birth, his parents split up, with his dad Benjamin moving back to his hometown of Brentwood in Essex, while Logan stayed with his mother Angarad in Wales. In 2019, Angarad met a man called John Cole, and they soon began a relationship. John was a former member of the National Front and had a series of criminal convictions, most of which were for violent offences. He was also known to be a racist and would often use racist insults towards Logan, who was now just aged 3. Once John moved in with Angarad and Logan, it wasn't long before they stopped all contact with Logan's father Benjamin. Angarad soon became pregnant and gave birth to a son in January 2020. The couple soon became distant from Logan and started rolling out extreme punishments for when he misbehaved. Some of these punishments consisted of Logan being deliberately burnt, being left outside in the freezing cold for extended periods of time, made to stay in push-up positions, and made to face a wall while the rest of the family enjoyed a takeaway. During the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic, John Cole's stepson, Craig Mulligan, came to live with the family. In August, Craig had allegedly pushed 4-year-old Logan down the stairs, breaking his arm. Instead of immediately seeking medical attention, John had attempted to pop Logan's arm back into place himself. This incident was referred to the police. 4-year-old Logan started school in September 2020 and was described by his teachers as a very timid boy with a stammer, incontinence issues and an unhealthy appearance. In January 2021, Logan was placed on the Child Protection Register and regular visits from social workers began. In July 2021, Logan tested positive for COVID-19 and began a 10-day isolation period at home with his mum, her partner John, and his stepson Craig. Logan was forced to spend the last days of his life alone in his room, but he was still accused of breaking a stereo in the house, which caused John to punch him in the stomach. His mother Angarad had also accused him of lying and pulled him up off the floor by his pyjama top, which had ripped. On this same day, a social worker had arrived at the house but was refused entry, despite it being day 10 of Logan's isolation period. She left after 20 minutes without seeing or hearing any evidence that 5-year-old Logan was okay. At some point between midday July 30th and 2 a.m. July 31st, Logan was murdered in his home by the couple. Angarad, John and Craig have never revealed the cause of Logan's death, so it's impossible to know the exact horror that he experienced in his last moments. CCTV shows John Cole leaving the house at 2:30 a.m, carrying Logan's lifeless body. He walks towards the River Ogmore with his stepson Craig following behind. The pair then return to the house without Logan and helped Angarad get rid of Logan's torn clothes and wash his blood-stained bed linen. At 5:45 a.m, Angarad calls the police to report her son missing, saying that she woke up to find him gone.
Please help me, please.
Where are you?
My son's not here. My boyfriend's not here.
Take a breath. Take a breath, 'cause I can't understand you when you're crying. Where are you? Who's not there?
My son, he's alive. He's not here.
Okay, take a breath. When did you see him last?
I saw him in the bed last night and I've just got up for my son and the other one's not here. Logan!
Okay, take a breath. He's 5 and he's gone. Can you see any
Logan! Logan!
I need you to speak to me, not just shout. I know it's really full on and it's really scary.
What do you mean?
What's his name? Is his name Logan?
Logan Williams, please.
And he's 5. Is he 5, did you say?
He's 5, please.
I need you to stay in the house. So who's run out after Logan?
My fiance, my partner.
Your partner has. Okay. So Dad's gone out looking, yeah? What's Dad's name?
John Cole. He's
Bodycam footage also shows the moment police arrived at the scene.
If he's unconscious, he needs me. He needs warm clothes. He needs mum. He needs his love.
It's okay.
I feel so useless, Dad.
I know.
This is all my fault.
Has he got a father?
His biological father's in London.
Oh, okay.
At this point, Angarad already knew that her son Logan was laying dead nearby, as John and Craig joined in with the search party. Just 19 minutes after the 999 call, Logan's body was recovered from the River Ogmore. He was pronounced dead at the scene, but it was later determined that if an ambulance had been called straight away at the home, he could have survived. Logan's post-mortem revealed 56 external injuries, as well as a torn liver and bowel. His injuries were likened to that of a car crash victim. John, Angarad and Craig were all arrested, but denied Logan's murder. During their 10-week trial, the bodycam footage and 999 call were played in the court. Over the course of the 10 weeks, not one of them shed a single tear for Logan, not even his own mother, and they all pleaded not guilty. Due to the overwhelming amount of evidence, Angarad was found guilty and sentenced to life with a minimum of 28 years. John Cole was also found guilty and sentenced to life with a minimum of 29 years. And 14-year-old Craig Mulligan was also found guilty and sentenced to life detention with a minimum of 15 years. Logan's father is now campaigning for Logan's Law. This would mean that the biological parents of every child referred to social services would be informed. Benjamin says that he had no idea what was going on with Logan. He thought he was a happy, healthy boy, and he was never informed that he'd been referred to social services. He says if he had known, he would have tried to get custody. Logan's Law could prevent this from happening to another child, and if you'd like to sign it, you can go to change.org and search Logan's Law.
This is one of the most disgusting and evil cases I've heard of recently. On the 7th of December 2017, teacher Thelma Boinville was desperately trying to make some extra money. She was doing a cleaning job to earn extra money for her family, and the job suited her as her 8-year-old could come along and play while she worked. This was really handy as it meant she didn't have to fork out for childcare. She set out cleaning some holiday homes on the day in question, and her daughter waited in the car. The spot was a lovely scenic place called Kelky Beach. However, instead of walking in on a normal holiday rental to clean, she walked into a nightmare. Stephen Brown and his girlfriend Hayley Dangerand were in the middle of robbing the place. They were scouring through drawers and wardrobes, hunting for valuables to steal. With Telma walking in, their plan had been foiled. They decided they needed to dispose of their only witness. The evil pair tied up the mother, whose daughter waited unsuspectingly in the car outside. They used a machete, a knife, and a hammer to murder the innocent woman. But the horror was far from over. They exited the holiday home and came across Telma's young daughter waiting in the car. They callously told the young girl, "We killed your mum," and then bound her up and gagged her. Sickeningly, they then took the 8-year-old into the home where they'd killed her mum and left her there tied up. The 2 Australian tourists who were renting the holiday home then came back and found the crime scene. The 2 killers were tracked down hours later in Telma's car, which they'd stolen and driven off in. Hayley was actually wearing her victim's earrings at the time. They actually begged for the officers to just shoot them and end their lives, but they wouldn't get away that easily. Telma's husband, Kevin, wasn't actually allowed to see his wife's body due to the extent of her injuries. The autopsy revealed that she'd fought for her life, with many defensive wounds indicating a struggle. Since the murder, Stephen and Hayley have both tried to blame each other. Stephen was found guilty of second-degree murder and apparently showed no emotion as the verdict was read out. Hayley is currently awaiting trial.
I'm going to warn everybody right now, the case that we're about to cover is easily one of the most disturbing true crime stories I've ever heard in my life, so viewer discretion is really advised for this one. This is Kevin Davis. He was 18 years old back in 2014 when this horrific event took place. Kevin lived here in Corpus Christi, Texas, and shared an apartment with his mother, Kimberly, and his sister, Destiny. On May 26, 2014, Kevin snapped. He had been having homicidal thoughts for a long time, but on that particular day, he decided to bring his dreams and his fantasies into reality. On that morning, Kevin told his mother, Kimberly, that he wanted to unalive himself, and she told him that she couldn't stop him if he wanted to. After hearing this unexpected response from his mother, Kevin went into a rage. He grabbed a cord and attempted to strangle his mother on the couch where she was sitting. But his mom, Kimberly, managed to fight him off, and in a panic, Kevin went into the other room and grabbed a hammer. Now, this is where it gets really disturbing, so if you're still here with me and you have a weak stomach, don't keep listening. Kevin then bashed his own mother's skull in with the hammer, hitting her at least 20 times. And he then grabbed a knife from the kitchen and inserted the knife into the head wound. At that point, Kimberly's head was opened up, she had a massive head wound, and her brain was exposed. And Kevin stuck his hand into his own mother's head and played with her brains. He later told detectives that it felt like putty. Now, after his mother was dead, Kevin dragged her corpse into another room and her, which is unbelievably shocking and disgusting. After all this was said and done, he went to a neighbor's house, told them to call 911, told them that he had just murdered someone, and he was arrested without incident. When Kevin ultimately arrived at the police station, he was brutally honest with investigators about his crimes. I listened to the entire interrogation, and I cannot unhear some of the things that he told investigators. It's vile and shocking. But at one point, he smiles at the investigators with a little grin and says, "Yes, I guess I lost to a corpse." After his trial, he was handed down a sentence of life in prison. He's still alive. He's still in Texas right now. And he even admitted to investigators that if he was given the chance, if he were out on the street again, he would kill again. I'm sorry to have to fill your guys' minds with this stuff, but this is a truly disturbing case that I can't stop thinking about because of how horrific it is, and yeah, I cannot believe that this happened.
Family of this missing girl found out via the media that she'd been murdered, butchered, and sold as kebab meat. This case will put you off ever eating a kebab again. Charlene Downs disappeared aged just 14 years old in November 2003. She was living in Blackpool, UK, and was last seen in an area containing many kebab shops and takeaways. While out with her friends one night, Charlene bumped into her mum. Her mum said that Charlene needed to be home by 10 p.m. that night, which was quite typical for Charlene. Tragically, this would be the last time that her mum would ever see Charlene alive. When Charlene didn't turn up by 10 p.m, her dad went out on his bike looking for her for around half an hour. When he couldn't find her, he just presumed that she'd stayed over at her friend's house and went home and went to sleep. When she still didn't arrive the next morning, her parents started to get worried and they called police. Police, however, said that they could not report this as a missing person until she'd been missing for 48 hours. Eventually, police did start to look for her, but they said that they presumed she was a runaway. The case went cold until 3 years later. Charlene's family were called into a police station. There was news of 2 men who had been arrested, linked with a local takeaway called Funny Boys. They were arrested on suspicion of murder and disposal of Charlene. This is when the family found out some shocking news via the media about what had happened to Charlene. An article published stated that she had been grinded up and sold as kebab meat. One of the brothers of the men who had been arrested had heard them bragging about doing this. Now, Charlene's disappearance actually unearthed the fact that these takeaways were being used as a front for P rings, where men were luring teenagers in with food and alcohol in exchange for things I cannot repeat on this app. When the case against these 2 men went to trial, the jury failed to reach a verdict. The case was then thrown out of court due to apparent lack of physical evidence. One of the reasons for this is how well Charlene's body had obviously been disposed of. Both men who had been charged were given a £250,000 compensation for being falsely trialled. Around a week after the trial, Charlene's mum was actually arrested for stabbing her husband. He declined to press charges, saying that he knew she had been stressed. Members of the family were also charged with racially aggravated assault against the brother of the man who'd been charged with murder, and also punching the man who'd been charged with helping dispose of her body. In August 2017, police arrested a 51-year-old man who lived in Blackpool at the time of Charlene's disappearance. This was on suspicion of murdering her, however, he was released just 2 days later. We still have no justice for Charlene, and nobody is behind bars for her killing.